Hi guys, this is Dr. Gonzalez here, and in this video I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to qualitative research. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because if you ever run across a situation where you are going to carry this out, you are probably going to have someone who is very well versed in this topic, who is there to guide you, and we have so many other important points in non-experimental research that we have to cover. So we are just going to briefly discuss what qualitative research is and how it's carried out. So qualitative research is research that uses non-numerical data. And through the gathering and analysis of that data, we want to understand people's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, or experience. The data comes from interviews, observations, focus groups, case studies, open-ended survey responses, and personal stories or written narratives. You're going to learn as we talk about qualitative research, the big word that's going to come to mind is subjectivity. A lot of the data that comes out of qualitative research is subjective. So we have to use qualitative research with caution. So, qualitative designs are in and of themselves going to be very different from designs that are quantitative in nature. So, our choice of a qualitative design is very much dependent on the purpose of our research, the kind of research question we have, the unit of analysis that we're going to use to analyze the data, and what kind of outcome is produced. So keep in mind with qualitative research, everything you do is driven by what you're trying to understand. We're going to briefly discuss the 5 core qualitative designs. Those are narrative research, phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, and case study. So narrative research uses the stories of an individual or a group to understand experiences. So think about things like biographical studies, autoethnography, life history, or oral history. Narrative research takes extensive information, and you also have to establish a very clear context. And because you're kind of telling a story of an individual or a group, you really have to have collaboration with the participant. Without that collaboration there, you're going to hit a really tough spot when it comes to gathering that narrative data. Phenomenological research explores the common meaning of an experience, like being a first-generation college student, for example. That's an experience. And if I study several first-generation college students together, I'm carrying out phenomenological research. We are emphasizing a single concept or idea, and we also have concepts that are hermeneutical and transcendental. Hermeneutical means it's focused on interpretation, and transcendental means we're focusing on the deeper essence of a lived experience. And again, I am a numbers-driven person. All of this sounds wishy-washy to me. It is not. It has a place in research, but it is, again, very subjective. So in order to carry out phenomenological research, your participants have to have a shared phenomenon that they're experiencing, and you, the researcher, have to understand broad assumptions about that particular phenomenon. Grounded theory research is attempting to create a new theory about how some sort of process happens. So as a researcher, you would use some sort of systematic procedure. You would collect data, identify patterns, and then build a theory out of what you get. So in order to be good at this, the researcher has to be able to set aside other theories, and it's also very hard sometimes to determine when you have enough support for a theory. Next, we have ethnographic research. This is a qualitative method that is used to study a culture, a group of people, the social patterns of that group, their behaviors, beliefs. The researcher is going to take time and observe and interview members of that group, and they want to try to learn how that group functions. So in realist ethnography, we're attempting to describe the group as accurately as possible, and critical ethnography studies culture while examining things like power, inequality, oppression, or other social problems. And the key to remember here is that an ethnographic researcher really needs to understand how to study a culture in order to get at their research. Case study research is probably the one that I'm most familiar with within psychology and education. It takes a close look at one person, group, event, or a setting and examines it deeply to look at its real world context. So challenges with this is that the researcher has to clearly define the case. They need to be able to explain why that case was chosen, and they need to collect evidence to support those findings. And I'm probably going to include an extra credit assignment maybe, or I need to get back and look. But if we do an assignment for this, it will be related to case studies. Let's talk about data collection. So in qualitative research, we are gathering data that is not numerical. So it's going to be words, and that creates a problem. The first thing we've got to understand with this is that when you go to collect qualitative data, it usually involves a site or an individual, and how you approach that data collection is going to be dependent on the type of site or the type of participant. So, for example, in a narrative study, you need individuals who are distinctive. They're different people. Phenomenological studies, you need individuals who have that shared experience of that phenomenon that you're studying, like we had said earlier, first-generation college students. In grounded theory studies, you need individuals who are in that same process that you're trying to study to come up with a theory for. Ethnographic studies, you've got to have that shared culture group, and it's usually done at a single site. And then case studies, it just depends on what kind of case study you're doing in order to determine what an appropriate site might be. You're collecting data on a face-to-face, intimate setting, so your access to those people and your rapport with them are both very important. To get that access, you're going to need approval from not only the individual, but any other people that are involved with a site. You might need review from some sort of special board in addition to an IRB. And then once you have that access, you have to build rapport with that research site. And by building that relationship, it's going to help make your data collection easier. Most of the time when we're dealing with qualitative studies, we're going to use a purposeful sampling strategy. It's very difficult to randomly select because you have so many eligibility requirements for that site and those individuals. So you might be only looking at people who meet those criteria and are convenient to your study. And a lot of times we'll employ criterion sampling, where you have individuals that have to have experienced that phenomenon or process in order to be included. Again, I'll go back to the example I was talking about earlier, first-generation college students. So that is the criterion to being in the study. If you are not a first-generation college student, then this is not for you. There's a lot of different data that we can collect through qualitative research. We can conduct interviews at the individual or group level. We can have observations where either the participant is aware or they're not. We can look at documents, maybe those are public or private. And then there's also audio-visual materials, photographs, participant-created artifacts. One of the things that I saw the other day, talking about some of these videos that are popular online nowadays with YouTube about arrests, so the body cam footage. If we did a qualitative study looking at how many times sovereign citizen language is used in everyday traffic stops based on body cam footage from a certain period of time in a certain place, that would be an example of how we could bring audio-visual materials in and do qualitative analysis with it. Now, how do we analyze the data? First, you've got to have a great, very, very good way of managing and organizing that data. You're going to put the data into digital files, and more than likely in this day and age, it's going to be some sort of searchable spreadsheet. And then you're going to take that data and convert it into some sort of text unit. We also use digital representations when it's audio-visual material. So down here I have an example. It says, I drink coffee every day. I have discrete and continuous. These are quantitative forms. We're talking about qualitative. So I drink coffee every day. I would have to find a way to code that into a form that could be fed into some sort of statistical analysis. The respondent did not say they drank 4 cups. They simply said they drank coffee every day. So it's kind of a yes-no thing. And depending on the context, there's a way to code it. Once you have that data there, the researcher is going to begin by reading the entire database. It all is read very, very carefully. And the researcher then uses some sort of organized system of notes to identify concepts and ideas that are jumping out from the data. Sometimes they use something called memoing, and that's a strategy where they write organized notes that allow them to then later on highlight concepts, repeated ideas, or maybe themes that are starting to emerge from the data. Describing those themes is the bottom line of qualitative data. So you take these memos and notes and you start organizing them into thematic groups or categories, and you code that into those larger themes. The researcher is the one that is doing the labeling. They're the one that's determining what is important. So again, this is very subjective. But the researcher is going to take that, they're going to group similar ideas together, and they're going to look at patterns to try to explain what the data are showing. Finally, we have interpretation, and that's the process where those themes are explained by the researcher. So he or she is going to organize those themes and try to connect them back to the research question. And they might consider different explanations before they draw some sort of conclusion from that qualitative data. When it's all said and done, the data and results are going to be reported in some sort of text, table, or a figure. This is usually based on the type of data that has been gathered, and the readability of that display is extremely important. How it's organized is going to be influenced by the approach. And I've included a logic model here. A logic model is a process that we use to help create maybe some sort of program or achieve some sort of goal. So you've got inputs, outputs, outcomes, assumptions, external factors, all of these things when developing, say, a community mental health program. These things are collected from a group of people that come in, and they recognize the situation and the priorities, and they can help the researcher or the program developer identify what the outcomes of this program are going to be, what the external factors that are unique to that community are. But in the end, a logic model is created. So this is an example of a real-world product that comes from qualitative data. You can understand how subjectivity is very important, so validation is going to be important with qualitative research as well. We're going to need to validate our data. There are different strategies we can use. For example, research-based validation strategies are going to focus on taking evidence from multiple data sources to support our research question. We're also going to need to be open-minded enough that we examine disconforming evidence and we examine and clarify any biases that we have as well. We can also use participant-based strategies, and that's when we go back to the participant and ask them for feedback. We might prolong their field engagement where we're collecting data, or we may even collaborate with them in a certain way in order to validate the data that we've gathered. In other words, we're basically going back to the participant and asking, does this capture what you were trying to say? We also have reviewer-based strategies, and this is where we bring in someone else. We might do an external audit. We might have somebody look at our description of our methods, or we may use peer review to critique the methodology or the procedures that we've used. Our data needs to be reliable, so whenever we can, we want to enhance detailed field notes when they're available. So we want to have good quality recordings of our interviews. We want to take transcripts from all of those interviews. We'd like to use blind coding of themes with high intercoder agreement. What that means is if I gave that raw data to 3 different people who were trained to code it, would they code it the same way? And then we also use computer software to help us along the way. The evaluation from the end of qualitative data, we use a hypothesis-driven data collection method and analysis. We want to make sure we use the appropriate way to do that. We want to state explicitly what our assumptions about the group or the theory or the concept were. We want to make sure we use explanations from all of the current theories that are available for that particular topic. And we want to take our results and use those to inform and improve practice over time. Qualitative data has a place in research, but I say that with a big grain of salt. It's very, very easy to make qualitative data do what you want it to do, and it is not very objective in nature. So you have to be careful. It does have its place, but you have to be careful with it. That is the end of that presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, it was really, really short. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out. Take care.